What time are we ending? 5 o'clock, right?
Take your time.
All right. You may come to regret that. Somebody in the front rows here, if you would let me know when we get close to 5, that would be cool. Thanks. Hello, my name is Mikey. I have talked to many of you before. Just for fun, how many of you have seen me do a talk not unlike this one before? Yeah. And remember it, that is. Because I know I was at the first SREcon in Santa Clara. It was a great honor to be one of the keynotes there. And I was at Lisa last year, and I saw some of you with Lisa t-shirts, so I know some of you were there. This is going to be new and different stuff, partly because many of you have seen me talk before, and because the technical conferences like this are the best place for me to do new and different stuff, because you are a little bit more substance focused and a little bit less about the presentation polish, so that works out well for me. So that means I may have to rush to fit it all in, or I may end a minute early and we'll have questions. It will be an adventure. We'll see. So, I'm going to tell you a little bit about me so you can decide whether or not you care about anything I'm going to have to say. First, I used to work at a large tech company in California. I blocked it out so you can't tell which one. The only thing you need to know for today's purposes is that large tech company is in the United States. This being an international appearance, I thought I would put in a little bit of context about the United States for any who may not be familiar. It is a country. It looks like that. We have a flag. We like. It's 240 years old, has 320 million people, GDP $18 trillion. I think that's the right exponent for trillion. We like to blow things up. And we really like guns. If you're not familiar with the United States, that'll get you a long way right there. Now, this particular country that I live in, it had itself a website called HealthCare.gov in 2013. It was not working very well. That is a screen capture from CNN where they are dramatically trying to log into the website and having it not work on live TV because that's very exciting. It's not like everybody could do that at home at the exact same time if they wanted to. And they kind of were. That was kind of the problem. I have a few screenshots of news articles and this and that. All of them are 100% real in case you are wondering. So I got asked, this was in 2013, to go out to what turned out to be Virginia with a handful of people that you see here. We worked on trying to make HealthCare.gov work better. I went to a lot of meetings and pointed at some people, which looked more or less like that. Team got bigger over time. We succeeded at making it slightly less terrible. We were quite happy with this outcome. And I went back to work at that large tech company in 2013. Actually, this was now January of 2014 when I went back. Now, I was there for about 6 more months, and I was asked to come work at the White House. That is an actual picture of me going into the White House as an employee for the first time. It was raining that day, very exciting. I got a little bit famous immediately, a little bit surprisingly. This is off of my phone, obviously, the news app, and I saved it exactly because the picture is me eating a corn dog off of my LinkedIn profile, which I did not update and still have not. So that picture gets run every once in a while. And also, mostly in the beginning, for the most part, if I was famous for anything in the year 2014, it was not having ironed my shirts properly, as you can see. That is still, honest to God, in the lead paragraph of any mainstream media story that I appear in, is that I don't wear suits and OMG, OMG. It was very soon, after this became a thing, it was very quickly pointed out to me that having the media obsess about your poor clothing choices is an unusual experience for a man in politics. Not so much for the other half of the population. So that's where I was. We were doing this thing. In 2014, we created something called the US Digital Service. Have any of you heard of the GDS, the Government Digital Service? It's a little closer to home. Yes. A lot of the same kinds of ideas that went into the GDS we reused in the United States, created a thing called the US Digital Service. We got this spiffy logo that came like 6 months later, but it confuses the story, so we're using it right now. I had this hardy band of adventurers from the very beginning. This is, well, I mean, not the very, very beginning. It took us a little while to hire this many people. They are the group meeting in the basement of, well, where the headquarters building is, in the basement near the White House, early 2014. That's where we were. We've been having ourselves adventures and finding things out as we went along. Looney contacted me maybe a while ago, March, April of this year, and said, would you like to come talk at SREcon? And I was like, well, I haven't really learned anything that's going to be any use to anybody at SREcon. And he was like, well, we're doing a little bit of a theme this year of, we're calling it Brownfield SRE. And I was like, well, why didn't you say so? I've got the brownest of brown fields. The U.S., like I mentioned, 240 years old. I wrote this down so I wouldn't screw it up. 228 years the same Constitution has been in use, which is generally accepted as the oldest written Constitution still in use, running an actual government that exists today, which is exactly the same thing as saying, like, we have the oldest running Unix kernel that's never been patched or rebooted or anything. So it has a little bit of technical debt. It's not the easiest place to make changes happen. What's that? We patch, oh, you're right. Technically, oh, now I'm going to screw this up. Technically, we're on like P22 or P24, something like that. But it's still basically 1.0. You can trust me on that point. It's changed a little bit. Sorry? In some places, it's still not rebooted, yes. And some of those patches are not really distributed super well throughout all the states. I'm just going to move on right now before this gets any worse for me. So, as I mentioned, we've kind of got the brownest of brown fields, where I interpreted brownfield immediately to mean it's wonderful to do a startup, it's wonderful to start from scratch, everybody loves doing this, it's every programmer in the world's favorite task. Let's make a new app where we'll do everything right this time, right? That's how this goes. However, in a lot of places in the world where a lot of the most important business in the world is going on, you do not have that luxury. There are very big, very old companies, very big, very old governments that process a tremendous amount of important business and money, if you count importance that way. The U.S. takes in about $3 trillion a year in tax revenue, which, as I worked it out, is about one Google every 9 days. So it's very high volume, very high importance to a large number of people, very, very hard to get things done. As we went around and tried different projects in different places, we, I think, can claim to be fairly expert on brownfield enterprises, as it were. There is very much a culture clash. There is very much two schools of thought out there in the world, probably more, but two that I come into contact with again and again and again. It has nothing to do with who's wearing a suit and not, has nothing to do with who works on which coast. Uh-oh. That'll teach me. Sorry. Just for extra drama, we're doing this with my laptop at 20%. There we go. So anyway, so there is a culture clash that you are going to see if you should find yourself in a situation like this. It's not about what you're wearing, it's about the attitude, the mindset. Here is how I would describe a brown field in the world today. You will immediately know that you have stepped into such a location by the words in use. All of you know these, but I'll bet not very many of you use them at work all day, every day, right? How many people think of themselves as working in IT? Like in California, maybe it's a little different here, but in California, like literally nobody uses those words. Nobody thinks of that. Cyber, God help us, everything is cyber. That means like cyber security, in case you are sufficiently far away from the olden times to have forgotten. I'll just leave it at that. The enterprise, software being enterprise, everything needs to be enterprise. Enterprise is a word that means you take something and add 2 zeros to the price tag and maybe it still does what it used to do. Maybe. Everybody's seen those products. There is a attitude of IT consists of a list of problems, and our goal as IT experts is to buy our way out of them as quickly as possible. That's like in one sentence what a lot of old line companies and enterprises, there's that word again, are trying to do. And I put cyber up there like 5 more times because cyber is all over everything, and it is very hard to get away from. I'm not funny enough to do it, but you guys know where the word spam came from, right? I know this audience knows this. Yeah, Monty Python, right? Like, so there was a skit where there was like ham, eggs, and spam or something, and then as they ran through the menu, like more and more instances of spam appear in it until it's just spam, 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 and eggs or something like that. So cyber is the word that works exactly like that in the government. Once it's crept into the conversation in one place, you can guarantee that in a couple hours it's going to be all cyber all the time. Now, contrast with, these are a bunch of words that you probably do know, and you probably have some feelings about, but at least when you hear these words being spoken, you know you are more or less amongst 20th century technology people, right? I'm not even going to say that like we're in love with every single fad of the way that we do things these days, but it doesn't matter. If you come into a place and you hear them talking about their agile sprints and their user-centered design process, and maybe they're talking about Scrum, maybe they're talking about XP. Again, I don't even really care which one of the particular little religions we're using at this particular moment. Any of them means we are in a whole different world from the brown world I was describing a second ago. Continuous delivery, important things, and cloud, 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 which if this world has an equivalent to the cyber word, it is cloud. Everything is cloud all the time. I know it really doesn't mean anything. I know it's just somebody else's computer. I know that sticker that a bunch of you probably have. But if you hear these words, you're in a different place. Now, the first thing that I felt like was an actual original-ish observation for you all that I thought I would throw in here is that you have to understand that all of these things in the happy world that we are trying to get to, they all co-evolved over a long period of time. They were not independent concepts that were just invented like in a vacuum and then dropped into a company and like we adopted the agile development methodology and that was great, so then we went forward from there and invented continuous build and so on. No, they all co-evolved in the organization, and the skills and the knowledge in the organization to execute them all also had to co-evolve with them. Why does this matter? This is, in case it's not obvious, this is a picture of a hummingbird with a very long bill which matches the size of the flower that it is eating from. Another actual biological example of co-evolution, at least according to Google image search. So there you have it. Why does this matter? Well, because what I see happen, what I see people try an awful lot of the time is to try to introduce all of these changes at once. Because it seems like you should be able to do that because you can see the way that things are now and you know that the way that things could be. So why don't we just, well, I'm going to come back to that in a second. Anything that starts with why don't we just is going to be problematic for you. Here are some things that I have seen happen. If you try to introduce like concepts like continuous build and integration, all that stuff, without something that kind of more or less walks and talks like a cloud platform, then platform issues are probably going to trip you and you're going to fall on your face all the time because you are trying to automate processes, you're trying to push code faster, and every day there is a new variation on the machine in production because the person who upgrades kernels decided that this was the week they were going to do rack 5 and everything gets tripped up all the time if you don't have enough consistency underneath you at the platform layer. If you want to introduce user-centered design type processes and you don't have any of that other stuff in place, you don't have the continuous build thing in place, well, that can be fun. You're going to do, here's what's going to happen. You're going to do a couple of design sprints. You're going to have a way better idea of what you think the product should look like. Then you're going to stop because you want to iterate. Bad news, the next iteration is going to be 3 years from now, or 4, or 5, or 7, or 10, or 12, or never. Because if you haven't fixed a lot of that other underlying stuff, then like that's how long the code push cycles are going to be. So that concept by itself will only get you so far. And I wrote down other examples, but you get the point, so on and so forth. The fact that all of these layers are interdependent on each other means that if you're trying to boil the ocean, you are only going to get so far, no matter what you're pushing at. This is, so if you're dropped into a place like this, and this is what happens, if you step out of the car, and you should be so lucky, one of you, to have my job a year or two from now, this will happen to you. You're going to step out of the car, go into an agency you haven't worked at before. You're going to have no map. You're going to have no idea how far to set your watch back, maybe just a couple of hours or maybe to like 1960 or anywhere in between. It literally can be anywhere in between. This is a thing that I discovered / made up back in the HealthCare.gov days, and I've gone back to refer to now and then. If you have nothing else, I have found it to be useful. If you have nothing else, and you're trying to figure out, you have a world which is just as brown as you know, all those examples I gave you of what a brown world looks like, that's where you're in. And you don't know where to start, here's an idea of a place to start. This is obviously a kind of a parody of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which goes from monitoring at the very bottom layer. I claim if you do not have any working monitoring, then nothing else you're going to do is going to matter. You might as well you're just firing shotgun blasts into the sky, as somebody I used to work with used to say. If you have monitoring, you can institute something that looks like incident response. Only if you're doing those things can you introduce the concept of the blameless postmortem, otherwise known as the root cause analysis in a slightly older jargon. If you're doing all those things, then maybe your testing and release process starts to matter. If you're doing all of those things well, then your development priorities start to matter, and only if you have achieved all of those other levels of achievement do your product decisions make any difference. This is exactly the opposite of what most organizations try to do. They have something that isn't working right, and they start saying, well, we need to change this product in the following 8 ways. And their latest 8 ideas for the product don't matter any more than their last 20 ideas for the product, because none of that foundation was there to actually execute any of those ideas, right? Tell me at least some of you have seen something sort of like this, yes? Am I the only one? Okay, there's a few, good. So we've been off on a few adventures. I can't possibly do a talk as a government representative that I am without talking about a couple of success stories, a couple of places where this has actually worked for us. I apologize if you have seen them before. They will be quick. There was a thing called SLS, stands for Scalable Login System. It was a replacement for the identity management, the login component that was built originally for HealthCare.gov. This is describing the thing that it started with originally. About $70 million a year in operating costs. You'll reach that number a lot quicker than you're used to if you are treating, remember this is on that brown slide, IT is a list of problems and my job is to buy my way out of all of them as fast as I can. So if reliability is treated as a hardware problem, there's a giant industry that is more than happy to sell you pieces of hardware that are built for very high reliability. All of them will be enterprise, and you'll recall that means that there's at least 2 more zeros on the price tag than there would be if you just bought a normal hard disk or anything like that. So $70 million a year to operate, about 25% inexplicable error rate, by which I mean this system had the hilarious property that something like if you typed in the wrong password, that counted as an error, and if the system crashed while trying to process your password, that also counted as an error. So that made it a little bit tricky to figure out what the error floor should actually be, but best guess about 25% of the transactions failed for reasons that we couldn't understand. In 5 seconds, see previous talk, response time was measured in integer seconds and not 0 or 1. Was replaced with a thing that a handful of people wrote over the course of a year about. 4 million is a good faith guess at how much we spent to develop it. We're actually not totally sure because the way the counting works, it's very complicated and the government basically doesn't know how to count a number that small. So but that's a guess. 0% error rate, that's a fair estimation because in the first weekend that it ran, I think we counted 4 errors, not 4%, but 4 altogether, which is several places after the decimal point if we're going to do a percentage. And I guess that's 20 milliseconds approximately of response time, which was reasonable and fine for that case. So that was a good one. We built a thing called the College Scorecard. This was a case unusually for our projects where we did more or less start from scratch. We designed it from the beginning. These are paper mock-ups you're looking at. There's another hilarious side story about trying to estimate the cost of doing the paper mock-ups, because that was a thing that we needed to do. So we're trying to figure out the price of individual pieces of paper now. But this was the design process. We talked to actual students, advisors, people that are going to actually be making a decision about how to go to college. I should have started by saying the point of the College Scorecard is to expose certain data that we think may be useful to people that are choosing which college in the US to go to, specifically information about earnings after graduation and the likelihood of your ability to pay off your student loan. To maybe preempt a question later, we're not claiming that's the only thing you care about when you're choosing where to go to college, but it's a thing you might care about, and a lot of people do, and it was data that you didn't have good access to before. Now you do. This is what it looks like if you were to open it up. I believe it's collegescorecard.ed.gov. Fairly straightforward. It works on phones, was designed to work on phones from the beginning. As you saw, the mock-ups that they tested were for mobile. Here's another example of this is an internal application. No end user was exposed to this directly, thankfully. Not that the things we do expose to end users are a lot better, but this is a form that has to do with part of the UI for gathering the information for a certain type of disability claim if you're a disabled veteran. That was replaced with something that is a good bit easier to use, we think. This was called the Skidoo application, if anybody's keeping score. So there have been a few places, and I promised I'd keep them quick. There have been a few places where we have gotten something done. Now, it's been 2 years. The team has gotten quite a bit bigger. This is dramatically out of date. This is a picture that is, I don't know, 6 months old, 9 months old, something. We just took another one, a new one with the new group a week or two ago. We haven't seen it yet. So this picture is also out of date. Just take my word for it, there's a lot more of us now. There are about 163, there were exactly 163 the last time I checked, employees of the US Digital Service today. As we've gotten bigger, we've taken on a lot more things. This is a thing that we actually published, the US Web Design Standards design project. The press loved it, as always. This is my favorite headline of all of them. New standards can make government sites less worthless. They wouldn't let us make that our logo. They wouldn't let us make that our slogan. Making government sites less worthless, one at a time. I may print it on a sticker, though, if I get feeling ambitious. It's up online at playbook.cio.gov design standards. It's here only as an example of, as we get bigger and have more time, we progress past the first set of projects that you saw, which were relatively quick hits. We take on bigger things. That leads me to feeling like I have something to say about what makes projects like this inside a very rigid organization and of the brownest of brown fields. What are the factors that make it possible to succeed here and not? And I'll bet they will not surprise you very much. I would call number one, you want the team to be as small as you can get it with as much autonomy as you can possibly have. If you think you are, in these decisions, the critical decisions about how the team is going to work and who they're going to work with and who they're going to report to and what kinds of policies they are and are not going to be subject to, all that stuff tends to get, my experience has been you have exactly one point where you have any leverage to negotiate any of those things, and that's before you have taken responsibility for the project. Those decisions tend to get made early, and they're very, very hard to change after the fact. Even if you've never been in this exact situation, I'll bet you're aware of the phenomenon where if you are considering taking a new job and negotiating for whatever you want, title, salary, office, whatever it's going to be, the day after you have taken that job, if you then come back and ask that question, best of luck to you. And it's similar here. These are important decisions that get made in the very beginning. So we have learned a lot of these the hard way, and hopefully we'll not forget them again. And that is the team, however small you think the team can possibly be and possibly have a chance of having the right mix of skills on it. Most of our teams are mixed units of a designer, engineer, a product manager, a couple of other character classes, size 3 to 5 or so. Don't make it any bigger than you have to, and don't give up any piece of decision-making authority that you don't have to at the beginning, because you will want it all back. The other thing that makes you more likely to actually get something done is if you have a mission which is very obviously critical to the organization, must succeed, and the success criteria are obvious. HealthCare.gov is always a safe example for me to talk about, and it had both of those things. It couldn't have been more obvious that the agency had not succeeded and needed to succeed at getting HealthCare.gov to work, because it was literally all day on CNN for 5 weeks. So there wasn't anything more left to lose as far as like this. Usually you will encounter a ton of resistance to rocking the boat or anything that might call attention to a project because people haven't really noticed that it's not really going very well. In the case where it's already been on CNN for a month, you don't got those problems. This is another one that we have found you can't do without. Actual executive authority, which you will have to figure out what that means in whatever organization you're dealing with. In our case, it usually means the cabinet level secretary or their deputy secretary as they're called. And in most agencies, that deputy acts as a kind of COO for the agency and is responsible for a lot of the day-to-day decisions that operate the agency, more so than the cabinet secretary tends to be. So we tend to work with them at that level. You will have to have that muscle and that prioritization in order to get access to all kinds of other things that the organization is going to need to do for you. And that takes me to the last one, which is you have to be able to go to any place in the entire organization and talk to them directly without intermediation. I hope all of you, that seems so silly that's not even worth saying because you've worked in places where that is the norm. In some large companies and or large governments, it is very much not the norm. It is a massive protocol violation for somebody of rank 1 to just wander in down to the cube farm and talk to somebody of rank 15 or whatever the hierarchy system is for where you are. That's a thing I had to get used to very quickly when I went to work for the White House. It was immediately a whole different world than when I was just another contractor working with the contractors on HealthCare.gov. Now, the anti-factors kind of write themselves. It's the same thing with a not in front of each sentence, more or less, so I'll go quickly. If you have a mission which is kind of not really easy to explain, but kind of like, well, we're not doing a great job at this particular business function, so we should get better at it, that is a danger sign. If there's no deadline, that is a huge problem. That is a huge danger sign, because if there's no deadline, I will tell you immediately what's going to happen is you are going to go in, do your thing, you're going to figure out what needs to change, you're going to report what needs to be changed, and the answer is going to be, well, maybe we could get another study to look at this for another year, and validate whether this is the right thing to do or not, because we wouldn't want to be hasty. Anti-factor 2, this one, if nobody thinks there's a problem, I do not have a good way to convince people that there is, well, I take that back. We have several good ways to prove to people that there is a big problem. All of them are things that are kind of outside of our range of acceptable motion, such as making it a big news story. Sometimes that happens, and then everybody believes there's a problem. If that hasn't happened yet, it can be very hard. If you have to start by convincing people that something needs to change, then your job is at least 5 times harder than it was otherwise going to be, and it was going to be hard enough. Yes, this is one of the best ones. If you have an indifferent or disconnected executive sponsor, or their attitude is, why don't you just X for almost any value of X? This is such a common experience if you come to work in the government. This is such a common experience, it is almost a running joke. I cannot tell you how many times I've been introduced to somebody who's usually very big deal and famous in their own right and CEO of something big or an author of a book or whatever, and they're supposed to have excellent insights for how to do things, and we will go and sit down in like the Pete's and have coffee with them, and they will say, why haven't you just changed the culture? And I'll be like, why did that never occur to us before? Like, I don't know. Like, no one's ever tried that. I mean, it's literally the same thing, to call back to a joke a little minute ago. It's literally the same thing as saying, like, you know, wouldn't you guys have less of these problems with the guns if you just all were less emotional about the guns? Like, could you just change the culture? Well, if you know how to do that, well, this goes for all of the anti-factor slides here. If you can figure out a way to do that, then for God's sake, you do this keynote next year and I will sit down there and watch, because we don't know how to just change the culture. The other example that Jen Palka, who helped create US Digital Service, usually phrases it as, most people start and spend their first few iterations and maybe their whole career asking, why don't we just make the desert wet? Like, I figured out what's wrong with the desert. Like, there's no water. We just need to make it wet, and that'll be the solution. And I don't know if that makes a ton of sense, but when you're in that situation, you will remember that, that I told you. People would tell you, why don't we just blah, blah, blah. So that's what brownfield looks like. I'm close to out of time, so I will finish up quickly. If you find yourself in a situation where you've got more anti-factors than positive factors for the kind of change that you want to do, well, my honest advice is to think hard about how much the organization needs this change and how much you're willing to put into it, because you are going to be the layer that gets ground to dust in the process of trying to get the organization to change behavior, and it will be hard. If you are wisely deciding to not take head on some of the stuff that you want to do, such as it's maybe not the time to introduce a continuous build process, which you know is what you need. You can still do a whole lot of good with changes that are perceived as non-threatening, we have found. In some places where we couldn't make the changes that we wanted to right out of the gate, we nonetheless have sped up velocity quite a bit by introducing concepts from the future like version control. That's not as scary. Monitoring is on this list as something you might take a shot at, but monitoring actually can be very threatening if they have even an inkling of what you're going to do with the monitoring, which is you're going to then, once you have machine-generated metrics of performance, you're going to be able to disintermediate 14 layers of the bureaucracy, and everybody will be able to see with their own eyes whether the site is working or not. It's probably stupid that I just put this on the video for everybody to see, because like this trick only works when they don't know that that's what you're going to do next. But that's okay. It's all right. None of the people I'm thinking of are going to watch this talk, so it's fine. If you do have your hands on something where you feel like you are making progress, you are making a difference, this is the couple of bullet points worth of advice that I felt like I had. When things are going well, your hardest job, if you are running this group, is to keep them on task now. Because suddenly you're going to have a group and an office and an executive authority and a hiring authority and a budget, and you're going to have, and as soon as anybody notices that you are actually making progress somewhere, almost everybody's vision in the bureaucracy works in the same as like the Tyrannosaurus Rex in Jurassic Park, which I have no idea if it's actually true, but like they can only see what's moving. And the faster it's moving, the more attention you're going to get. So suddenly your job, you're going to find that that very well-defined mission you started with suddenly has a whole bunch of Christmas tree ornaments hung all over it. Of other things that like, why don't you just fix this too while you're at it? Why don't you just fix that too while you're at it? And why don't you just fix the whole culture so that the whole agency gets better? All of those why don't you just statements, those will come back to haunt you. So your task will be to keep the team focused as best you can. And focused on the original results that you came here to do. And my last one, again, this is maybe not, I'm not sure that this would sell a lot of inspirational speeches or books, But my experience has been that we very, very often want to tell ourselves that after we just get this done the first time, it will get easier the second time. I do not have data that says that that actually happens. So when you go back to do that second project at the same agency who just learned all of those lessons about continuous delivery, monitoring, blah, 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 you will have a little bit of an effect where people have seen a better way to do things and are willing to do it the same way as they were on that other project. And you will have gotten the attention of way more of those Tyrannosaurus rexes that can only see motion, and it will, they about balance each other out. By which I mean the extra requirements that people will brainstorm that they forgot that you should have followed last time too, that will pile up very quickly. And the hangers-on will pile up very quickly, and the mission creep will pile up very quickly. So I have not found it to actually get easier the second or third or fourth time you try to do it. That is my story for today. I'm going to leave this slide up here. We are hiring. If you have a U.S. work authorization, we would love to talk to you. That is the website to do it. There is even a little referral code, which if you put it down there, we keep score on these little events that we go and do. So if I can get more applications than my rivals are getting at their speaking events this week, then I will win. So please go and apply if you're at all interested. Thank you very much for listening. If we have a minute for questions, I'll take a minute for questions. If there are none, then I don't have to.
So having worked for a large corporate organization that just consists of alphabetic letters, what are the most interesting parallels from the experiences that you had there and in the machine?
In the machine, what was the comparison?
What are the most interesting parallels you found of working in Silicon Valley and in Washington, D.C.?
I get it. At that machine that rhymes with schmoogle. I would say, I don't have a ton of depth to this answer because I can either give a 2-sentence answer or a 2-hour answer, and I assume you'd prefer the 2-sentence answer. The thing that has been most interesting to me through this experience has been observing how very much of the behavior of people in large groups and organizations is completely reproducible and predictable. The things that people find themselves intensely frustrated with when they first go into the government are actually problems that you're already familiar with a slightly different veneer over them. The competition in large companies I've worked at for promotions and attention and executive support and whatever is not any less political than it is in the average agency that I've worked at. There's a question here, and then there's a question at the microphone. I think that's Phil, right?
I'll just go.
All right, go ahead.
So what agencies or governments, or are there any agencies or governments that you look up to that you think have really nailed embracing the best practices?
Agencies or governments that we really look up to?
Or is it exclusively private companies?
Well, so, I mean, credit where credit is due. The GDS, the UK version of us, had a 3-year head start, and they've made good use of that head start. They've gotten a lot of things done that I would be happy to say we had gotten done 3 years from now. They've taken on across the country the identity management problem, for example, which we are not really at large scale inside the US today. Believe it or not, the most modern digital government from the space age future that I'm aware of is Estonia. They have accomplished a ton of the things that are pipe dreams to us today. Like you can sort of imagine a world in which you didn't file tax, there was no such thing as filing your taxes because the IRS already has all the information and they just send you a check or a bill as the case may be, and maybe you can go back and double check the math if you want to. That is That is way over the horizon from where we are right now. But that's a world you could imagine getting to, and I'm not sure that Estonia does precisely that, but all of their services that I have looked at have that kind of character. They're like a whole generation ahead.
Thanks.
This one and then that one.
I'm curious about how the rollover from government to government works, because you've done all this good work setting stuff up. Does that depend on what happens in November? Do you get to stay and help make America great again?
There are very many laws that govern how I can respond to that question exactly. I will happily point out that one of the major party candidates in the United States has a detailed policy proposal, or a technology platform, in which we are very explicitly called attention to as an example of the type of thing that that particular candidate would like to see continue to happen in the next administration. I don't have any anxiety at all over whether the thing that we're doing will continue to exist in the next administration, just because we have decent support, obviously, from this administration that created it. They believe in what we're doing. Congress has been extraordinarily, really remarkably for the political climate that we're operating in, supportive in that they have funded it with the budget for 2 years running now. We just had our own hearing, so like I said, we're getting the attention of more and more people. Even if none of those things were true, having created an agency in the government, the default is it's going to be there for 100 more years, right? Like, it's going to be way harder to get rid of than it was to create in the first place. So I don't lose any sleep over whether it will exist in the next administration. I do everything I can to try to leave it on rails that I think point in a good direction. Because you could take all of the advantages that we enjoy, like the connection to the executive leadership and the budget and the freedom to operate and whatever. If you were to take all of those advantages and apply them to do evil, then you would also accomplish a lot of evil. So as much as we can, we're trying to keep it on course to stay focused on citizen-facing services that will actually make people's lives better. Yes?
Hi. So in my eyes, the US government can find themselves pretty lucky that they were able to find guys like you who were actually able to execute that change and actually make things work. Now, there are other governments who have really, really shitty websites. And the policymakers actually have a problem there because they have all the enterprise, the software vendors who are like happy to sell them less good software. So what advice can you give to policymakers to actually find teams which are like able to execute things like you do?
So I don't know how many countries this applies to, just because I haven't like tried to study or whatever. But at least in the US and the UK, there was a big gulf between the kind of technology and the kind of suppliers that were available to the government and the kind that was producing private sector, you know, your Amazons, your Googles, your Microsofts, your Apples. So the US started with the big advantage of having such a big density of a large tech industry that's successful in the US already, and that's where the US government should look and did look to create something like the USDS. It was the same pattern in the UK. So that's my first answer, and I don't know if it's useful to all countries, because if you were to come to a place that does not have a critical mass of private sector, you know, entrepreneurial spirit working on the technology, my guess is the best option in that situation is to look at ways to buy the services you need in a little bit more modern ways to get you a little bit better result. That's always going to be the solution, including in the United States. Most of what is paid for and bought from the private sector today will still be paid for and bought from the private sector. We would like to get better results in some cases. I don't know how useful it is, but like I said, I've not studied the entire world where the technology industry is distributed.
Yeah, it's a hard problem, right?
Say again?
It's a hard problem, just right?
Yeah.
The right people.
Yeah. I think you are next, and I have Niall and Liz.
So there's an interesting implicit contrast in your talk when you're talking about the value of these services that you can build when you have access to lots of data. For example, the automatic tax filing or the college report card is a great example. with the discussion in the earlier session on data privacy. And so this is clearly a politically difficult situation to navigate and politically loaded in some sense because of the EU-US discussions on the matter. But in the long term in the US, how do you think that's going to play out, and how do you think that's going to affect government's ability to provide good services and so forth?
In the form of a question, your question is something like where are we going with respect to data privacy policy, which is evolving, something like that?
So basically we're going down this road where we're trying to figure out the right path between, or the right compromise between data privacy and availability of data for services that benefit people, right? And this is happening in healthcare as well.
Yeah. I've seen that from both sides, being that I used to work at a large unnamed internet company and now work inside the government. I'm not going to have any super satisfying answer to that, because I think that honestly all that's going on right now is nobody knows. Like, we are discovering every day like new unintended consequences to data collection that people have done, right? And that's in both cases, both in your big private companies and inside the government. So I feel like we're not anywhere close to a final form of like very basic answers, like what constitutes personally identifiable information. The research that's going on for de-anonymizing supposedly anonymous data sets is been terrifying, in the sense that anonymity is nearly impossible to achieve with a lot of types of data, right? Like a couple of location points and you're done. So I think that answer is evolving very much over time, and the healthiest way I can see it playing out is if private companies and government are actually competing to be the one which is trusted more by the end user, and we see that dynamic a little bit here and there. That's the healthiest form that I see it taking. So when I worked for a private company, we wanted very much people to believe that we were trustworthy and could, it was okay to have us gather all of this data. And what you really didn't want was those scary people from the government to get their hands on it. And then I worked for the government, and they want exactly the opposite story. And it's just a tug of war right now. And like I said, the best I can see to hope for is that if they are competing for the trust of the consumer, then good. At least the gradient should be pulling in the right direction.
Thanks.
Niall.
So I guess the first question is, when are you going to write your memoirs, and do you need an editor? Because I could probably sort that out for you.
I've heard that you've had some success writing books recently. So.
Second question is, those projects that you showed, the College Scorecard and so on, were they pushes from above, or did you have a glittering array of options in front of you from which you plucked those? Are they the highest impact things you could be doing?
There is a universe. It's closer to the first thing you said. Well, I don't remember what order you said them in. So it is closer to.
Pushed from above.
Okay, so it's less of that, and more like there is a portfolio of things that we really can see that we could get better at, that we could deliver a better service at. We do our best to pluck out of that universe the things that are going to do. Our number one criteria, as written down and testified to Congress at this point, is we are looking for the projects that are going to do the greatest amount of good for the greatest number of people in the greatest need as fast as we can. So that, of course, gets moderated some by some practical considerations of where a project is likely to actually take root or be successful, and we are getting a lot sharper edged about identifying the conditions for where things are likely to be successful or not, and that's really most of what I put into this talk today. And then, of course, that also then has to be squared with what are the administration's priorities, because we report to the president, and what is Congress's priorities, because Congress provides the money. So it's like a multi-dimensional puzzle to solve at any given time.
Thanks.
I think this will be the last one, yeah? Liz?
So the question I wanted to ask is, you're obviously very selfless, having decided to work for the government where they don't pay you, where they cannot pay you more than the president, and you're delivering projects that would have cost, $20 million for $4 million. So kind of what do you see as the role of a person working in the government versus just a newer, smarter, less expensive breed of contractors that will do things the way that we know how to do in this room?
That's a great question, and I hinted at it and maybe didn't explain it very clearly. I think the problem, not everyone will agree with this statement, so I will just start. I'm imagining the YouTube comments in my head right now. But I don't think the problem is ever money for the things that we are working on in the government. I haven't gone to a place yet and said, well, there's no way to get this project done well because you're not spending enough money. Like, it's just going to cost more. Like, that is the default answer from most CIOs most of the time, right? Because IT is a list of problems to buy your way out of. And if the last $30 million didn't buy your way out of it, then the answer must be another $30 million. I don't think that's right most of the time. I think there's plenty of money to go around, and I love the idea of a larger number of people waking up to the fact that we're over here ready to spend $70 million on a login management system. That's what we're doing right now. And if you or your friends or anybody that takes the notion wants to start more suppliers, I know it's harder than it should be, and I'll come back to that. It's very tough to break into that contracting business, but if you can do it, then the money can be great, because we're spending a ton to get what we're getting right now. So if you can either produce a working login and password system for $70 million, or produce one that does not work for, let's say, only $10 million, either way, I've come out ahead. Like, that's all, there's a lot to win there, if you ask me. And that leaves, but we won't see very much of that change happen if we don't also have the people inside the government who are free of the conflict of interest, which is kind of unavoidable when you're in the position of selling services to the government, in order to help them understand how to buy more intelligently and use the money more intelligently. So if I had, to the extent that I have like a 10-year vision for the future, it consists of a relatively small number of autonomous people embedded in the government with as much freedom of movement as we can give them, and the ability to speak truth to power, and also the ability to gather information from the lowest, from the break room in the cube farm where the work is actually happening. If we have a set of people that are able to fulfill that function, and we reduce the barriers to entry a little bit so that the competition for private sector contracting is a little bit more meaningful, then you might see, the temperature of the whole entire ocean rise very gradually over a long period of time. So, what's that? We're seeing that now. Great. I hope so. Oh, you mean the ocean, the actual literal ocean? Yes. We are also seeing that. Go world. Big success. All right. I think that's it. Thank you very much again. Thank you for staying to the end.